So my name is Jamie Lee Aitken. I moved to Brigton when I was, gonna say about 5, possibly younger. And we moved in here because my dad's mum, so my gran, lived in this area. So we moved from the north of Glasgow to Kilmarnock, but then our houses were pulled down, so we moved to Brigton to be closer to Granny. So yes, I've been in the area for a very long time.
But you yourself have moved out?
Yes, so I moved out when I was 19 to Glasgow city centre to be with all the students because I was studying acting and I thought I'll be with my people. My little brother, who's actually 23, he still lives at home though, so he didn't fly the nest. He just stayed at home. And I am now out in Cumbernauld, which is North Lanarkshire, which is miles away. Just sort of got further and further away.
Now, it's perfectly normal for people to move away and so on, but what was your thinking? Did you not want to come back? Had you found more interesting places? What was your thinking?
Yeah, just didn't have anything other than family left in the area, I guess. All my friends had moved, so friends had moved to Dumfries or Stirling or Falkirk, so was kind of placing myself in between my friends in sort of Falkirk, Stirling ways and family in sort of East End of Glasgow ways. So yeah, it's really interesting because when I take a walk around the area, it's changed so much for one. But people stop me and be like, oh, how's your mum? How are you? And it's all my mum's friends, all the sort of older generation. But I don't see anyone that I went to school with, that I went to primary school or secondary school with from the area. So yeah, sort of moved in between where my friends went. So they went further afield, Edinburgh. Some of them were up in Aberdeen, and that's just them flying the nest, I guess. But never had a particular calling to come back to Brigton.
But you sense that your generation has generally kind of moved away, is that right?
Yeah, I definitely feel when you take a walk through sort of Brigton, it's changed so much. Like, Greg's moved, and I remember freaking out when I saw Greg's moved and being really upset by that. I was like, what is going on? I've been gone for like a year and came back to visit and Greg's had moved. It was like, what? So I think there's been so much change that when you kind of come back to the area that you grew up in, it doesn't look like the area that you grew up in anymore. And you don't see familiar faces that are your age. You see people and you're like, oh, who are they? You feel quite territorial almost. So yeah, I think my generation certainly flew the nest and flew afar and didn't come back.
Was that because just normal kind of moving on, or were things that you didn't like?
I think for me, I've always, so we've got family in Ireland that we visit quite frequently, and they are rural Ireland. Several coaches, cars, taxis to get anywhere. And I think Cumbernauld felt more like Ireland than it did being here, where it's very city life and there's buses going by all the time, cars going by all the time. Whereas where I am in Cumbernauld, it's quite rural, so there's a lot of trees, there's forests, there's more nature that you can kind of take a walk through. And I think that's something that always bothered me growing up, is that you could go to the Glasgow Green and that was it. There was nothing really big. Like, we weren't allowed to go into the sort of foresty area behind the community centre because that's where the gangs were, that's where the older teenagers went, and you couldn't go there because it wasn't safe. So there was nothing too naturous, I guess, about where I grew up. And I wanted it to be more like Ireland, where there's lots of nature.
Although I suppose some people might say actually it's far more naturist, to use your word now, than it was when your parents came here in the first place.
Yeah.
It was a pretty heavily industrialised area.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has felt, coming back to it at least, that there's less than I remember as a child though. So there's a tiny green space that we used to play in. It was essentially someone's back garden, I will not lie. We were just breaking and entering at that point into people's back gardens to get a little bit of greenery. And that's not there anymore. That's another block of houses. So they've built essentially just another block of houses, and it just seems like every time I come back to visit, there's more houses and more houses and more houses, which is a bit.
That's interesting. So they're filling in the gaps, are they?
Yeah, definitely think they are. Which has been upsetting, I think, coming back to, because you're thinking, like, I had a very distinct memory of when I was about 8. And me and my cousin were in this back garden and we were playing witches, and we were like, okay, right, you set up the fire for the cauldron and I'll go collect the frogs or whatever it was. And about 20 minutes into the game, the police arrived and they were like, what are you doing? And we were like, oh, we're just playing witches. And they were like, oh, okay. We had a complaint because people thought you were going to set fire. And we were like, no, it's the game, it's not a real fire. And we showed them our cauldron and we showed them our magic potion to these police officers who were not the least bit interested. But it's still like a memory that is fond to me, my cousin, to like my mum, who thought it was hilarious when 2 8-year-olds were brought to the door by the police. And like, it is a sort of really funny family tale that we all joke about and reminisce on. And now when you walk past that bit, it's houses and you can't be like, oh look, remember when, because it's pointing at someone's window, which feels weird.
You are of an age where you will have witnessed the Commonwealth Games and so on, and you'll be aware of the changes that came along in the wake of that, or at least not even in the wake of it, in before it happened, in preparation for it. What kind of difference do you think that has made to the East End?
The biggest thing, I think, for myself, is that the best play park in the area was Kilmarnock Community Centre's play park, because they had like tyres and like you could do like almost like army drills and huge slides, and it was just a really good play park. And I remember when they told us that they were pulling down the community centre, and we were like, oh, but that's where we have like our birthday parties. If like you have your birthday party at the same time as someone, then Bridgeton Community Centre is out, so then you go to Kilmarnock. So we're like, oh, that's really annoying that we're losing that provision. But then they told us that they were turning our play park into a car park. And I think everyone in my sort of generation was up in arms. We were so raging at this idea that, I mean, not that any of us would have went to play in the play park at the age that we were at the time of it happening, but we were still really annoyed and really bothered by, like, younger generations aren't going to get that really cool play park, which I probably would now go back and play in, being older, but still, it was so good. But I suppose the difference in the area, there was a buzz, there was an excitement, something really big and cool was coming to not only to Glasgow but to the East End, and we had the velodrome, and that was a whole new facility, and our school got to go along and see it and use the facilities for free, and so there was a lot of positive around it. But I think my generation were so stuck on our play park that we were sat in this free gym running on the treadmill being like, yeah, but I mean, they could have kept the play park. We were all so angry. I remember we were like talking about petitioning and everything, like we were, because we would have been 5th or 6th year at school, sort of end half of secondary school at that time.
Highly politicised.
We were up in arms because we were asking the school what we could do about it, and they were like, nothing. Like,
that's very funny. That's a very nice story.
Yeah.
I think that's probably all we need. What do you think, Tom?
That's brilliant.
Yeah, no, thank you very much.